We'll call the subcommittee to order, and I want to welcome everybody here. Good morning. We all share the same critical goal of reducing the number of fatalities and serious injuries on our nation's roads. Over the past years, federal transportation safety programs, along with other factors, have played an important role in reducing these numbers. When this committee was developing its surface transportation bill a couple of years ago, improving safety on our nation's roads was one of the very key principles. Today we're here to examine the implementation of the safety provisions in the FAST Act. The FAST Act is the first long-term surface transportation bill in a decade. It improves our nation's infrastructure. It reforms federal surface transportation programs and refocuses those programs on addressing national priorities, and it encourages innovation to make surface transportation system safer and more efficient. The FAST Act also provides our non-federal partners with important resources to improve the safety of our nation's roads. These resources include, but aren't limited to, increasing funding for federal transportation safety programs across the modal administrations, reforming certain NHTSA safety programs to reduce barriers to state eligibility and improve incentives for roads or for states to adopt laws and regulations to improve highway safety. Consolidated 9 existing FMCSA grant programs into 4, streamlining the program requirements to reduce administrative costs and improves the flexibility for the states. And improving safety by incentivizing the adoption of innovative truck and safety and bus safety technologies and accelerating the implementation of safety regulations that are required by the law. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on the progress that their agencies are making in implementing the safety provisions of the FAST Act. And I thank you all for being here today. I know some of you traveled farther than others. And with that, I will turn to Ranking Member Norton for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first, I want to say how much I appreciate this hearing on improving the safety of the nation's roads. This is an issue of critical importance because safety has not been improving. Just yesterday, I was on the floor for the approval of safety for the metro system here. Safety is becoming a critical concern in transportation. Since I have been ranking member, our subcommittee on highways and transit has spent considerable time on issues of critical importance like technology and innovation and automation. As important as those subjects are, I hope we can have more hearings on safety. We've had two hearings on public safety now, and I hope this is another one in what will be a series. I have written requesting a hearing on the oversight and monitoring of motor carrier safety under the CSA program, for example. There are a number of other topics regarding safety that are worthy of exploration. Mr. Chairman, motor vehicle crashes should be negative, should be going down, decreasing in numbers. You know, that's the American way. Either we want things to go up every year, like the economy, or we want things to go down, like crashes. So I was astounded that in preparing for this hearing to learn that pedestrian fatalities have increased. That's an increase I'm not looking for, by almost 10%, 9.5% in 2015. They are at their highest level since 1996. What is wrong with us? What is wrong with what we have been doing that these figures have been getting worse? I have particularly concerns in the District of Columbia where pedestrian deaths represent 56% of all traffic fatalities. We're asking people to get out and walk, and then you take your life in your hands as you cross the street. The figures are continuing to get worse. The first 9 months of 2016, we saw an 8% higher rate than the figures I have just quoted in 2015, which were already 10% higher themselves. So we really can't sit idly by. I think the public wants us to do something. Obviously, these are matters at the local level and state level, but there surely matters here for this technology. Now, I'm pleased that technology at this hearing, technology is an important piece of how we would enhance safety in my regard. And I'm fascinated by the work being done to advance innovative solutions for future generations to avoid needless loss of life. But full automation, which I believe would reduce needless deaths, is really not around the corner, as exciting as it is. The three leading causes of death in 2015 were the three leading causes of death in 2015 were responsible for 2/3 of all deaths, and they were all based on human factors. I'm not sure what technology will do about them. We haven't got to this in technology yet, because these factors were, almost 2/3 were because of alcohol impairment, speeding, maybe we can do something about that with innovation, and distracted driving. So the question before the House, as they say, is what steps can be taken now, right now, to bring down auto fatalities and injuries, to ensure that when you get behind a car or bus or truck, for example, that you have the training and education necessary to take on that responsibility, safety. One of my own major issues as ranking member has been more robust commercial truck and bus driver training. Buses, but particularly trucks, are an increasing mode of transportation in our country. Congress first directed the Department of Transportation to develop training standards for commercial motor vehicle drivers in 1991. That was over 25 years ago. Between 91 and 2016, the department failed to produce a rule that provided adequate training standards for drivers. All of that time, no rule. Late last year, though, the Department of Transportation put out a new rule based on negotiated rulemaking. I was very hopeful, given the negotiated rulemaking. But this rule failed to include a minimum number of hours behind the wheel training. So it's all up to the trucking companies, how much training they get. And the Congress of the United States is taking no responsibility for those trucks out there where people are driving without adequate training to drive a cut. That rule, which did not have a minimum number of hours, was really a missed opportunity, a great disappointment. So I'm hoping that today's hearing will be a change from our endless requests, which has become the norm, for exemptions and calls to block DOT safety rules. There is room for improvements in many rules of the federal government. But rather than calls to simply eliminate regulations, we should be challenging industry, Department of Transportation, stakeholders, all to be more creative and work toward the common goal to utilize their own resources and imagination to create a more safe road for all. So I'm very pleased that we have a NTS, National Transportation Safety Board member here. For 50 years, the NTSB has been the leader in setting a high bar for safety and informing Congress of what policy solutions will generate the greatest safety improvements. But bear in mind, the NTSB does not have enforcement authority. It is up to this committee and to the Congress of the United States. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Now, pleased to have Ranking Member DeFazio. Would you like to make an opening statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased we're having this hearing today. It is important to hear from, in this case, I'm pleased we're hearing actually from career staff as opposed to political hacks. So perhaps we'll get some good information here today. You know, we seem to be going the wrong way when it comes to surface transportation. In particular, we had a spike in fatalities. We have twice the rate of fatalities of other high-income countries. You know, obviously there's some issues here. I believe part of the problem is the state of our infrastructure in places where it's obsolete, obsolescent, or deteriorated, that contributes to the fatality rate. And so the lack of investment is part of the problem, and obviously the same lack of investment has led to reductions in our safety programs of FHWA, FMCSA, and NHTSA are all part and parcel funded through the same process, which is you know, the Highway Trust Fund, which is underfunded. So that, I believe, the solution both for rebuilding our infrastructure and for enhanced safety comes with more robust funding. Also, you know, we need to, you know, have sensible regulations. But there's, I think, a little bit in this particular administration, they're going overboard in terms of restraining reasonable and needed safety regulations. And I fear that they will continue to go down that path. I mean, I did support in the FAST Act, you know, provisions to require that they revisit and retool some of the CSA system, but we want to take corrective action. We want to update it. We want to make it accurate, and we want it to be a tool that will be useful in terms of identifying areas or operators who need more attention or perhaps even shouldn't be allowed to operate. But you know, we can't just throw out the whole concept of having a better system, which I fear this administration will do. So hopefully today we will hear some ideas from these career folks, and hopefully Congress will see fit to include that in its oversight and future actions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member DeFazio. With that, I'll welcome our panel and introduce them. We have Mr. Walter Weidlich, who's the Acting Deputy Administrator at the Federal Highway Administration. We have Mrs. Daphne Jefferson, who's the Deputy Administrator at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. We have Mr. Jack Danielson, who's the Acting Deputy Administrator at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And we have the Honorable T. Bella Denzar, who's a member of the National Transportation Safety Board. With that, I would ask unanimous consent that all witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, that is so ordered. And since your written testimonies have been made a part of the record, the committee would ask that you limit your summary at least to 5 minutes, or be pretty close. And with that, Mr. Weidlich, you can begin.
Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Holmes Norton, and the members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me today to talk about FAST Act implementation and ensuring the safety of our roads. As I'm sure you'll hear often today, safety is the department's #1 priority. At the Federal Highway Administration, we strive every day to ensure that our highways, bridges, and tunnels are safe and reliable for the American people. The recent increase in highway fatalities after decades of decline underscores the importance of the coordinated efforts of the agencies represented here today to address road safety. FHWA is a proud member of the Road to Zero Coalition, and we look forward to working with our sister agencies and this committee on the critical vision of achieving 0 fatalities by 2050. The cornerstones of our efforts to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads is our Highway Safety Improvement Program, which provides an estimated average of $2.6 billion of funding per year over the course of the FAST Act. Through the HSIP and other efforts, FHWA emphasizes a data-driven, performance-based approach to save lives. We estimate that highway safety improvement projects result in $4 to $7 of benefits for every dollar invested. Projects funded through the HSIP must be consistent with the state's Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which is developed by states in coordination with federal, local, and tribal partners. These plans establish each state's individualized safety goals, objectives, and key emphasis areas, and integrate the 4 E's of highway safety: engineering, education, enforcement, and emergency medical services. A growing number of states are using HSIP funds for projects on locally owned and rural roads, and more local agencies are participating in the development of strategic highway safety plans. This local investment is critical to our Road to Zero goal. And in 2015, 19% of the U.S. population lived in rural areas, but rural road fatalities accounted for 49% of all road fatalities. In addition to the HSIP, the FAST Act also continued performance management standards first enacted in MAP 21. One of our primary achievements in recent years has been implementing these performance management standards for safety. Beginning this summer, states and metropolitan planning organizations will set data-driven annual safety performance targets for the first time. They'll measure in part the number and rate of fatalities and serious injuries, and will use that data to inform future investment choices. FHWA, in coordination with NHTSA, has provided significant resources to advance implementation of these safety performance management requirements, including delivering target-setting workshops in 45 states. In addition to implementing these core federal aid programs, FHWA is also looking to the future of safety innovation and research. Through our Everyday Counts initiative, we encourage states to adopt proven but underutilized safety countermeasures. We're also working with state partners to expand vehicle-to-infrastructure or V2I communications technology, which is now eligible for funding under major federal aid highway programs. FHWA, in coordination with our sister agencies, is developing a vision statement clarifying our important role in advancing connected automated technologies and preparing our national roadway infrastructure for an automated vehicle future. When leveraged with V2I communications technology, connected automation has the potential to deliver significant safety, mobility, and environmental benefits. Finally, FHWA continues to invest resources to identify the next generation of safety technology, including through our many research programs run out of the Turner Fairbank Highway Research Center. While I focused my remarks today on FHWA programs with safety in the name, FHWA strives to incorporate safety in the entire $44 billion federal aid highway program so all Americans can benefit from safety and reliable roads. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you on these critical issues, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Now we'll hear from Mrs. Jefferson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Holmes Norton, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's work to improve truck and bus safety and implement the FAST Act. It is an honor to testify alongside my colleagues Jack Danielson and Butch Weiderlich. FMCSA's mission is to save lives by preventing crashes. We oversee more than 500,000 truck and bus companies and almost 5 million active commercial driver's license holders. Americans depend on the trucking industry to move more than 2/3 of the nation's freight. The large majority of motor carriers are skilled, committed to safety, and play by the rules. It is our task to identify the small fraction that are at high risk for a crash. Highway fatalities and crashes involving large trucks and buses have dropped in the past decade, but they've been increasing in recent years. In 2015, for example, the number of fatalities involving commercial motor vehicles rose 4.1% from the previous year. We must be vigilant to reduce crashes. This includes conducting data-driven safety compliance and enforcement activities, leveraging safety technologies, ensuring driver qualifications, and expanding partnerships. We rely on our partners in state and local law enforcement to keep our highways safe. Through the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program, the MCSAP program, more than 13,000 law enforcement personnel act as a force multiplier, conducting more than 3 million roadside inspections each year. Congressional funding in fiscal year 2015 has allowed us to sharpen our risk management tools to identify and prioritize high-risk carriers. We revised our algorithm to identify carriers with a crash rate 3 times higher than the national average. We investigated 90% of them within 3 months to help bring them back into compliance. We commissioned the National Academies of Science to take a close look at our safety measurement system, or SMS, that we use to prioritize motor carriers. The study made recommendations to further improve SMS. We're taking these recommendations seriously and will submit a corrective action plan to Congress. Additionally, we're addressing industry concerns about crash preventability. Later this week, we will announce a 24-month demonstration program to review less complex crashes to determine if they were preventable and can be removed from the motor carrier's records. Under Secretary Chow's leadership, FMCSA is looking to the future. We've been encouraging industry to develop advanced driving systems that improve both safety and economic competitiveness. We're meeting with key players through a series of public meetings and listening sessions to discuss advanced driving systems and truck platooning. Another example of leveraging technology is the use of electronic logging devices to address hours of service compliance and driver fatigue. We're working closely with the industry, law enforcement, and stakeholders to ensure a smooth transition to electronic logging devices as its first compliance date approaches later this year. We're focused also on driver health and education as key components of safety. Last year, we published a final rule on the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. This new program, with a compliance date of 2020, will enable the agency and employers to identify individuals who test positive for use of controlled substances or abuse of alcohol. To improve driver education, we published the entry-level driver training rule last December. This was a product of a negotiated rulemaking in which our stakeholders worked side by side with us to formulate minimum training requirements for all new drivers. We will establish a registry of training schools with appropriate curriculum standards for classroom and on-road training. FMCSA is also a member of the Road to Zero Coalition, a partnership with the National Safety Council, NHTSA, and FHWA with the aim of eliminating truck fatalities within 30 years. We've heard from our industry partners and safety advocates that it's important to educate drivers like you and me on how to safely share the road with commercial motor vehicles. As a result, FMCSA has recently announced its Our Roads, Our Safety campaign that will focus on states with the highest incidence of crashes. This targeted approach will allow us to reach drivers where education and awareness can make the greatest difference. Mr. Chairman, we must do more to make our roadways safe for the traveling public. Every FMCSA employee, our state partners, our DOT sister agencies, and our stakeholders share this solemn commitment to bring this tragic increase in highway fatalities back down. Together, with your support, we can improve safety for all. I would be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jefferson. Mr. Danielson.
Good morning, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Norton, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, thank you for the opportunity to update you on NHTSA's implementation of the FAST Act and our efforts to improve safety on our nation's roads. For the last 50 years, NHTSA has diligently worked to fulfill our mission to save lives, prevent injuries, and reduce the economic costs due to road traffic crashes through education, research, setting safety standards, and enforcement. We could not work towards our mission without the support of this committee and your work on the FAST Act. In 2015, we lost 35,092 people on our public roads. That was a 7.2% spike in traffic fatalities and the largest single-year increase in 50 years. Unfortunately, the preliminary numbers appear to show that roadway fatalities increased further in 2016. As many know, 94% of serious crashes are the result of human choices, such as distraction, alcohol and drug impairment, speeding, and fatigue. The bottom line is the overwhelming majority of crashes result from someone making a poor choice. In the FAST Act, Congress provided more tools to combat unsafe driving behavior, including such persistent challenges as impaired and distracted driving. How many times have you observed the driver in the car next to you texting or looking down at a phone? How often was that car swerving, falling below the speed limit, or worse, speeding toward another car? Sending or reading a text takes your eyes off the road for an average of 5 seconds. At 55 miles an hour, that is like driving the length of an entire football field with your eyes closed. Distracted driving is a prime example of the poor choice that can cause crashes, and the FAST Act is helping us address that through grants to states that enact life-saving distracted driving laws. In fiscal year 2017, we were able to award 27 grants to states to address distracted driving. These grant funds are available for a variety of safety purposes, including distracted driving enforcement. We look forward to working closely with the states to increase the number of these grants in future years as more states enact these important laws. In addition to distracted driving grants, the priority safety grants in areas such as occupant protection, impaired driving, and motorcycle safety, the FAST Act added grants to promote pedestrian and bicycle safety, 24/7 sobriety programs to combat drunk driving, and racial profiling collection. Today, technology plays a substantial and growing role to improve roadway safety with a long-term potential of removing the human factor from the crash equation altogether. There is a good deal of excitement over the potential of automation in vehicles to prevent crashes and save lives. Automated driving systems are capable of addressing critical cause of over 90% of serious crashes. Secretary Chao has made the review and improvement of the federal automated vehicles policy a top priority. The Secretary is focused on establishing a framework that supports innovation and the safe testing and deployment of automated driving systems. Technology has the potential to greatly improve safety as well as the travel experience. However, technology is a double-edged sword. Over the long term, it promises us an amazing future of safe and convenient mobility. But in the near term, it poses an immediate threat from every other driver on the road who refuses to put down their phone. Sadly, too many of these drivers are young drivers whose inexperience magnifies the risk to themselves and those around them. NHTSA is always looking for creative ways to increase roadway safety and improve driver behavior. With your continued support, our safety campaigns such as Click It or Ticket, Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over, and You Text, You Drive, You Pay will encourage safe driving choices, and these campaigns are changing driver behavior and attitudes for the better. Safety is NHTSA's highest priority, and I thank the subcommittee and the staff for its continued support and for devoting the resources and time to the important safety challenges that NHTSA confronts. And I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Ms. Dinh-Zarr.
Good morning, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on behalf of the NTSB. We've just heard that more than 35,000 people die on our nation's roads each year. As an independent government investigative agency, the NTSB is at the scene of some of the worst of these crashes. We provide assistance to families, and we make safety recommendations to prevent these tragedies from happening again. Our most wanted list identifies 10 focus areas that we know firsthand can improve transportation safety. 7 of these areas specifically affect highway safety. They are impairment, distraction, occupant protection, fatigue, medical fitness, collision avoidance technologies, and event data recorders. More than 10,000 fatalities each year in the United States involve an alcohol-impaired driver. Impairment by other drugs is also a rising concern. We've recommended a comprehensive approach to address impaired driving, including lowering of the per se blood alcohol content, strengthening requirements for ignition interlocks, and taking strong action to prevent commercial drivers from using these substances. In 2015, more than 3,400 people died and 391,000 people were injured in distracted driving crashes. Effective change requires strict laws, proper education, and effective enforcement. We have recommended banning non-emergency use of portable electronic devices by all drivers, high visibility enforcement, and targeted communication campaigns. We've investigated many crashes in which improved occupant protection systems, such as seatbelts, child restraints, and vehicle design features could have reduced injuries and saved lives. Since 1995, we've recommended that states require primary enforcement of seatbelt laws for all vehicle seating positions equipped with a passenger restraint system. While school buses generally are safe, We've identified benefits from using lap and shoulder restraints. Thus, we've recommended training for bus drivers, students, and parents on the importance and proper use of seat belts, and that states or school districts consider lap shoulder belts when purchasing new school buses. Fatigue is a significant concern, especially in commercial trucking and bus operations. For more than 25 years, we have advocated the use of technology like electronic logging devices. These devices may be used as part of a carrier's fatigue management program. Such programs can reduce fatigue-related crashes and should be required for all carriers. More than 90% of crashes can be attributed to driver error. Increased implementation of vehicle-based and driver-assist collision avoidance technologies can aid drivers and help reduce the occurrence of certain types of crashes. Finally, data recorders capture and store critical information that help investigators determine the cause of a crash and guide companies and operators to take proactive steps toward prevention. We have frequently expressed our concern about the lack of requirements for heavy commercial vehicles to have event data recorders. The FAST Act provides critical resources to help states reduce highway deaths and injuries by focusing on seatbelt use, impaired and distracted driving countermeasures, motorcyclist safety, and graduated driver licensing laws. We continue to monitor progress on other initiatives, such as hair testing for commercial motor vehicle operators, and ensuring that deficiencies in the FMCSA Compliance, Safety, and Accountability Program are addressed to identify carriers that pose the greatest risk to the public. The NTSB is also looking at other safety issues. Next week, we'll consider a safety study examining speeding-related passenger vehicle crashes. We're also developing a special investigation report regarding pedestrian safety. Finally, NTSB recognizes that emerging technologies in automated vehicle systems have significant potential safety benefits. We have a history of calling for automation to provide an increasing margin of safety in all modes of transportation. We plan to complete our investigation of the first known fatal crash of a vehicle operating under automated control systems later this year. And of course, when it's complete, we would be happy to provide you with the findings of this crash and any crash we have investigated so that it might be helpful to you in your work to make our roads safer. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much to all our witnesses. Now I'll go ahead and start questions. I'm going to start with Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wasn't expecting that right quick. Mrs. Jefferson, recently the National Academies finished their CSA and SMS study, and I was wondering, it says about FMCSA use a more detailed structural sound mathematical model. Does the agency intend to develop a model for the CSA scores?
Congressman Gibbs, thank you for that question. FMCSA appreciates the work that the National Academies performed on the SMS study. Our intent is to implement the recommendations of that study. We will be engaging the National Academies to continue working with us, as well as engaging stakeholders as we go about developing our corrective action plan.
Whatever statistical model is developed or used, will it not count against drivers who are not at fault in an accident? Because that's been one of the big problems in the current scoring.
Well, I can't speak in detail on what the model will entail. We would be happy to keep Congress abreast as we go through the process. But we are looking at opportunities through crash preventability pilot program to look at crashes that drivers may come back and say they were not at fault, and provide them an opportunity to provide information so that they can be removed from their record.
Because I think in this, the National Academies identified a small number of violations that correlate with crashes, but yet they identified nearly 900 other possible motor safety regulation violations. You know, it'd be nice if maybe they focus their attention on the regulations that correlate with crashes and, you know, put more priority to that?
One of the recommendations was that the 899 potential violations, we review those and focus on the ones that have the greatest correlation to safety. So we will be taking a look at that.
Does the agency plan to hold public meetings or invite stakeholders to meet with the agency during this planning period for a formal response to the recommendations of the report?
Yes, we do. We're working now to figure out how to conduct a public meeting before the 120-day deadline for submitting the corrective action plan. And as a part of our planning, we will engage stakeholders throughout the process.
Okay. Also, you know, the FAST Act included several reforms. One was for process for interested veterans from active duty service and women to obtain a commercial driver's license. If we've seen an increase in the number of veterans in that program, what's the status of more veterans and women obtaining the CDLs?
We are working on rulemaking that will make it easier for men and women who have used heavy commercial vehicles in the military to transition into civilian life. We're also working with the Veterans Administration and the Department of Defense in helping to facilitate transition of veterans coming into commercial motor vehicle industry.
Good. Mr. Danielson, the FAST Act required DOT to conduct a study about marijuana-impaired driving, submit a report to Congress. Can you provide us an update and the status of that report?
Of course, sir. The report is in its final agency review, and we hope to have it in your hands very soon.
Also, NHTSA roadside studies have shown the presence of marijuana among drivers has increased, and that marijuana's positive driving now exceeds alcohol positive driving. What steps is NHTSA taking to address this issue?
The role of impairment by drugs is not well understood. There's two basic reasons for that. One is there's not a scientifically acceptable threshold for impairment by drugs. The other is that there's not a technology to detect drug impairment. However, what we do know, a couple things, is that marijuana usage has gone up 50% from 2007 to 2014. And we also know that through laboratory studies that marijuana impairs judgment and impairs your ability to drive, particularly with reaction time. And so what NHTSA addresses this via training of law enforcement through our drug recognition expert program. We have 8,000 law enforcement officials who are trained to go through an extensive battery of tests on the roadside of people who are suspected of impairment by drugs. This is a court-accepted process. NHTSA is also working on research to develop a drug detection method, a device that we could give to law enforcement using oral fluids.
I guess I'm out of time. Are you back?
Ranking Member Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jefferson, you perhaps heard my opening remarks. In my opening remarks, my concern about driver training. Now, Congress has the same concern and expressed that concern in the FAST Act when it directed the FMCSA to give, quote, safety the highest priority. So I was heartened that after 25 years there was a rulemaking that was going to get all of the factors, especially the number of hours of training necessary. And lo and behold, you did. You had negotiated rulemaking. Negotiated rulemaking is consensus rulemaking. So while you had disparate actors, they agreed on 15 to 30 hours of training, depending on other factors. That was a triumph after 25 years. Now, last year, that rule came out without those minimum number of hours. It seems to me that you have not met the congressional mandate to give safety the highest priorities if you've left the most important factor, the number of hours of training, out of the rule. So how do you reconcile? Why, indeed, were those hours which the stakeholders agreed upon not made a part of the rule?
Ranking Member Holmes Norton, safety is our highest priority. The entry-level driver training rule was a negotiated rulemaking. A key part of that negotiation was developing curriculum that sets a minimum standard for commercial driver training.
Ms. Jefferson, I'm going to ask you to answer my question. I didn't say that you didn't develop an appropriate curriculum. I thank you for that. I'm asking a very specific question. If you were able to get such disparate stakeholders to agree on the number of hours training necessary, why did the rule not include that since there was agreement on that factor?
The number of hours...
15 to 30 hours.
15 to 30 hours, depending on the class of the CDL.
And the license, et cetera, yes.
And those hours were based on the minimum level of curriculum that was agreed to. That curriculum, that course requirement, is a part of the rule. There has been no change.
Why was 15 to 30 hours not a part of the rule, Ms. Jefferson?
The 15 to 30 hours was used as a minimum to get to those courses. In order to get through the courses and to allow for the flexibility, it's a minimum. It may very well take longer to get through the curriculum.
Are you saying that in order to get through the course, the curriculum, that I congratulate you for issuing, that you will have had to have 15 to 30 hours of on-the-road training?
It depends on the skill set that somebody brings into the program. We're setting the curriculum that they're required to have. In order to successfully complete entry-level driver training, they will have to complete the curriculum that was agreed to.
Are you saying, Ms. Jefferson, this is very confusing. Are you saying that the curriculum involves on-the-road driver training or not? Is that your testimony?
That is a part of the entry-level driver training requirement. We just did not state a minimum number of hours. The curriculum that the industry, as well as the driver training schools and academics developed, is what was included in the rule. That's a minimum level of training that's required for the CDL.
On-the-road driver training. So you think the rule already incorporates the 15 to 30 hours on the route because of the curriculum and what's necessary to, in fact, pass the curriculum?
We do. We believe that what's in the final rule is sufficient to provide a standard level of entry-level driver training across the country. It's taken 20-plus years to get there, but it gives us 25 years. Yes.
Ms. Jefferson, I will take another look at it. The fact that you eschewed the number of hours seemed to me to be very strange. I do want to ask, what's wrong with us, Mr. Danielson? We find that driver accidents, fatalities are going up. And then I was given some figures that show that U.S. traffic fatality rate is twice the average of 19 other high-income countries. Why is that? What are they doing that we are not doing?
Ranking Member Norton, the increase that we saw in 2015 was, by rate, was the highest increase that we saw in 50 years. But it coincided with another historic increase, which was a rate increase of vehicle miles traveled. There is no single cause to the increase in fatalities. However, we do know that over 90% of serious crashes are due to human choice and error. And that's why NHTSA, 2/3 of NHTSA's budget goes directly out to the states in the form of formula grants to address these serious behavioral issues, which are the choice to speed, to drink and drive, to send a text from behind the wheel. But to address your specific question about the comparison, last year, NHTSA joined with FMCSA and Federal Highway along with the National Safety Council, to launch the Road to Zero initiative, which is an unprecedented initiative involving over 300 partners of behavioral safety, vehicle manufacturers, road user groups, with the goal of driving this trend back down and completely eliminated roadway fatalities over the span of 30 years. This is akin to what other countries have done. The country of Sweden, which is on the other side of many of the charts that you'll see from where the U.S. is, embarked on this 20 or 30 years ago, and it has had a tremendous effect by bringing all of these different groups together to address this complicated behavioral question.
So we're now doing what other countries have already done, and you expect that to drive down these fatalities and injuries.
That is the goal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Boss?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jefferson, there's something that concerns me because I've got several of my companies. Just so you know, I drove tractor trailers most of my life. Drove my first tractor trailer across the lot when I was 9 years old. Come from a family that started in 1933 in the trucking industry. And I believe that safety is vitally important, but I also see some of the rules and the concerns that I have as the rules move forward at a time when driver shortages are so bad. And I want safety first, but I need to look and see what we can do to make sure as we implement certain things that those things can be implemented and still allow us the opportunity to provide, because we got a lot of people out there needing products and needing to keep products moving. So what I want to know is there anything whenever we implement the ELD, and we're coming up on a deadline when it has to be implemented. Several companies don't have them in place yet. They're trying. The expense is very large. Do we have some kind of mechanism in there that allows leeway for the implementation of this, or are there any things out there that allow you in the rules to allow that to happen and give a wise opportunity for those companies to meet those regulations?
Congressman, the first implementation date or compliance date for electronic logging devices is December 18th of this year.
I know that very well.
And we've been working very closely with industry as well as our state and local law enforcement partners towards preparing for that date. We have over 70 providers that have signed up, ELD providers, and we're seeing the cost of equipment come down as we get closer to the date, as we get more and more companies that are providing the equipment. And the ELD rule was intended to be a performance-based rule to allow for lower cost solutions for small businesses, for small carriers, up to state-of-the-art fleet management systems for larger systems. Those lower cost systems are compliant with the rule. And we will continue throughout the rest of the summer and into the fall to get out and meet with drivers and try to understand the issues, but we do see the costs coming down.
Okay. Let me ask you this then, because what I really want to know is if, as they're trying to turn this up and you're limited on the amount of people that can install them and you have all this, now you're hitting their December hard line. After that December hard line, someone stopped, they are charged, and how are they charged? Or is there any way that there can be an extension if they do not have these programs in place?
We don't have a way to extend it. The compliance date was in the final rule. However, I can assure you that we are working with industry, with our state and local law enforcement partners to make sure that not only are we ready, but also what's the state of the industry as we get closer to that date. And we're seeing, as I said, more and more companies coming in with lower cost solutions. And the companies that have previously equipped with automated onboard recording devices have an additional year to upgrade to the ELD standards.
Okay, so my question, then is the company then the one that's responsible, or is the driver? If all of a sudden the driver gets in the one that's not equipped, are they responsible?
The the company is responsible for the vehicle. The driver is responsible for keeping track of their hours of service.
So they can use a regular logbook to do that after December 18th?
If they have an exemption to be able to use it.
If they have the exemption, okay.
Yes.
All right. So what I also need to know then, I guess, and because I'm running out of time, but as we move forward with this, is there any exemptions for times like, for instance, when we have a very bad cold snap, and we have propane drivers and gas haulers that need to get products? Is there going to be exemptions for extension of hours? Because once you have an EDL in place, it's no longer based on your manual logbook. Now all of a sudden we're on the technology and everything like that. It's the same thing for grain season, same thing for the list goes on of those times when product needs to be moved and people need extra hours to get those products moved.
Congressman, let's keep in mind that the hours of service regulations have not changed. It's just the method of recording hours of service. And so during heating season, where companies currently can request exemptions
They can still
to
do
hours
that.
of service, they can still do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. My time is over.
Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jefferson, as you know, part of MAP 21 was that FMCSA should develop rules that would prevent employers from forcing drivers to drive beyond their authorized hours. You published a final coercion rule to implement this more than 18 months ago. Luckily, it escaped the Trump ban on safety rules. But I'm not aware of any use of this coercion rule. I'm very disturbed by a recent series of articles in USA Today. This is something that I actually held hearings on back in 2008, as I recall, the abuse of drivers at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And these are very specific stories, and one employee was terminated after speaking to USA Today, and another employee was told, "There's the door," when he was told to drive beyond legal limits, and they say this is a pervasive pattern. That one company, Morgan Southern, was particularly mentioned. I think others have problems also. Have you prosecuted anybody there? Are you following through on any complaints by drivers there using the coercion rule?
Ranking Member DeFazio, we are investigating complaints that come in under the coercion rule. I can't speak to specifics at this point, but we would be happy to get back to you on specifics, but we do have several that we are investigating.
Okay, I'm hopeful that you will use this because detention time and the port drayage are two areas where we're forcing people to drive beyond their authorized hours, and we need to be taking meaningful enforcement action of abusive practices. So thank you. Mr. Danielson, last year NHTSA proposed a Phase 2 voluntary guideline for distractive electronic devices that are aftermarket, not installed in the car. I've seen, I read an article about devices that will project your email onto your windshield so you can be emailing as you drive or reading your email. Would that be considered a distraction?
Yes.
Okay. And where are we at with the Phase 2 voluntary guidelines? Is that, now we heard from the Trump administration they weren't going to impede safety rules. So is this one moving forward?
These were guidelines, sir. So they were advice to device manufacturers for things for them to consider when they're designing these devices that, when used during driving, would minimize the potential for distraction. I would point out, without naming any individual companies, that several device manufacturers that are well known have already begun to roll out optional features that where a device owner can elect to turn on this feature, and the smartphone can detect if you're driving your car, and then delay notifications of texts and other things until you're done with your driving trip. So device manufacturers are already taking a look at this and trying to determine?
Yeah, some, but there's always, I mean, this was actually a heads-up display on the windshield. Now, I would consider that to be fairly distracting. Doesn't have anything to do with the conduct of the vehicle itself. Ms. Dinzar, would NTSB have concerns about these sort of devices, and do you think we need something more than voluntary guidelines?
Thank you, Ranking Member DeFazio. We absolutely have concerns about any type of distracting technology, and that's why we've investigated actually accidents where we've seen that technology has had an impact. As far as regulations, we leave that up to the wisdom of your judgment and that of the DOT. But we have made recommendations to avoid these type of distractions in vehicles.
Okay.
I should add, I apologize, that that is in addition to our collision avoidance type of technologies. Mm-hmm. And those, obviously, we have made recommendations in support of those.
Right. When we have great collision avoidance or great self-driving cars, then people can email or twerp or Twitter to their heart's content while they're driving, but I have real concerns about it going on in the current atmosphere. So I'm going to look into this further to see whether or not the voluntary guidance has had an impact, and whether or not there's always going to be someone who's going to say, well, we don't care about the voluntary guidance. I'd like to know if actually someone is marketing these heads-up displays that put your email on the windshield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your work on the FAST Act. I wanted to briefly discuss one aspect of the FAST Act, something that I had championed specifically for the state of California, important to the state of California, but many other states as well. And that's the NEPA Reciprocity Act. That was H.R. 2497 when it was a standalone bill, but the legislation proposes changes to Title 23. Basically, the NEPA Reciprocity Act would say that a state like California that has CEQA and NEPA, you go with the highest environmental policy. You just don't do it twice. So we are looking for the rule on this. We're looking for the implementation on this. And Mr. Weidlich, I wonder if you could give us an update on where we are in the proposed rule.
We're actually working through that process and working on that rule, and we should be seeing something soon. A concern we had has been voiced with that particular provision is the statute of limitations of 2 years versus the 120 days. There's been some concerns from the state of California whether that would be an incentive or a disincentive as far as taking on that responsibility. But we are working on that rule, and we should be coming out with that soon.
You used the word soon twice. What's your ballpark on soon? That means a lot of things here in Congress.
It does. But again, we're working through that process, and we don't have a timeline specifically on that, but soon.
Okay, we're obviously looking forward not only to the rule, but the implementation quickly. And it's certainly something we want to continue to work with you on. But, we've got summer projects starting up, already ongoing in California, and many have reached out to say, why are we going through this process twice when you've already passed a new law that doesn't force us to do that? So whether it's road construction or a variety of other projects, including some of the water storage projects that the President has talked about, in California, going through this duplicative process not only slows things down, but it really decreases the amount of people that are willing, or businesses that are willing to bid on these projects, going through a long and cumbersome process. That also gives you 2 opportunities to sue and litigate during the process. So it is certainly something that we want to get done quickly, and we would look forward to working with you on not only on the rule, but the judicial review process as well. And soon in our book would be quickly, since we are moving. We're hoping that with the President wanting to get rid of the duplication in government and cut regulations, since we've already passed this one into law, we would hopefully hope that soon is 30 days or less. We've been waiting a while. I yield back.
Mr. Lowenthal.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the panel. I had some questions, but I want to switch to something I heard in the panel's testimony. And Ms. Dinzar, the Honorable Ms. Dinzar, in your testimony, you mentioned the NTSB's ongoing work to investigate a fatal crash involving autonomous technology, And I look forward to the final results and the recommendations of this investigation. I agree with you that technology presents real opportunities to improve safety and safety lives. But I want to know, what can we do today to make sure that this technology is developed and deployed safely? What do you see us as really beginning to focus on?
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal, Congressman Lowenthal. A lot of the technology that's available today is actually the building block for complete automation. And Congress obviously has an important role to play because of the wide range of stakeholders. I believe that the NTSB, we have a unique background because we have worked in automation in other modes of transportation, especially aviation, and we've seen the positive and the negative effects of automation, as we've seen in, for example, with airline pilots. So I think that is our lesson, is that we have to remember that it's not a panacea. It's a whole progress. We have a continuum, as you know, of automation. And as we progress towards more and more complete automation, we have to be aware of where the driver or the operator, in the case of aviation, needs to step in. So I think that the biggest issue is that there's a lot of automation that is already being used. Collision avoidance systems, a lot of lighting, emergency braking. All of those are part of automation. It's not complete automation, but I think we shouldn't delay those for fear of other dangers.
When do you see this rolling out? Can you give us some time frame?
I'm sorry, sir.
How do you see this playing out and rolling out, the time that we're going to begin to see much more automation on our streets?
I think we will begin seeing, we are investigating, as you know, the Williston, Florida accident, and as more and more use of it comes along, the NTSB is in a unique position. We only make recommendations based on tragedies that have occurred. So I think that we'll be making more recommendations from our end as, unfortunately, we see more. But at the same time, we hope that the use of automation in the sense of collision avoidance and safety will also be increasing. And that could happen rather quickly. It is happening now, in fact. It's already happening.
Thank you. I want to follow up on Representative DeFazio's comments, Ms. Jefferson, to the FMCSA's coercion rule that the representative brought up just a little earlier. I represent the Port of Long Beach, so I have seen this and I've represented it since I was on the City Council in the state, and so I've seen this issue about drayage drivers and misclassification and potential wage theft for now over 20 years that it's been going on. And so there have been many port drivers, drayage drivers, and have brought up many of these wage theft and misclassification cases. And in California, our labor commissioner has received hundreds of these claims. I would just like to know how FMCSA is coordinating with the state of California's Department of Industrial Relations or with the Department of Labor here at the federal level to disseminate information about drivers' rights under the coercion. How are we coordinating?
Thank you, Congressman Lowenthal. We have, I've also seen the recent reports out of USA Today and other publications, and it's concerning. One of the reasons—
I was actually on the docks while this was all taking place.
Okay. All right. We have not at this point coordinated with the state of California or the Department of Labor. We will take a look and follow up as necessary and be happy to get back with you.
Well, I would like that if you could get back to me. Thank you, and I yield back.
Now recognize Ranking Member Norton for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask, Mr. Cummings of this committee is not able to be here, but had a special interest in safety and has asked that we enter into the record by unanimous consent a statement related to the tragic school bus crash that occurred in Baltimore last year.
Without objection, so ordered. And with that, we'll move to Mr. Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panelists for appearing here today. I'll just get right to it. Administrator Weidelich, this with revamping of the fast lane into now the infra program, we're glad to see the president continuing to push the proposal of infrastructure grants. In Butte County in Northern California, where I represent, my home county actually, they had submitted under the Fast Line program. That wasn't fully acted upon at the time, but they will resubmit. So the project's impacts were mostly on goods movement in the regional economies, and that was unquestioned, but also an additional factor, as many of you have all heard about, the crisis we had with Oroville Dam last February here, with the impending possible failure of the spillway there when the lake was very full, and an evacuation of nearly 200,000 people in Butte County. It really underscored the issue with State Highway 70 through there, which is one of the, Butte County is one of the few counties of some size that doesn't have a complete four-lane system linking NorCal to Sacramento and farther south. It has a patchwork of some four lanes. So what was underlined in this situation was that you had a state highway with a much two-lane area that caused a bottleneck that was hours of standstill for people in an evacuation zone here, as again brought on by that crisis with Oroville Dam. Thankfully, nothing ultimately washed out with the so-called emergency spillway there, but they didn't know. They had no idea. And if you saw the illustration there, on the TV news, the helicopters were, the dam goes across the Feather River. So you see Highway 70 traverses Feather River as well below. You saw cars parked on the bridges on Highway 70 go over Feather River. I mean, that just has the images of a disaster movie if something were to give away, those people that couldn't move on those bridges there, as well as all up and down Highway 70. So what I think the federal agencies should consider, and I'd like to have your opinion, is the impact of grant programs, and then maybe we highlight the ones that have both the positive economic impact and you get the double plus of the public safety, or vice versa, for a system like that. So can you include these factors when considering the upcoming infra applications? Is that something that we can help urge you to have, since it'd be like a double benefit when we're looking at an acute safety situation as well?
First of all, Congressman, I'm very familiar with that particular area, and I-70 in that area, or State Route 70 in that area, and Oroville and the dam.
Great, thank you.
Under Fast Lane, there are the small grants that will be announced soon. And under the infra program, there is improved criteria within that includes innovation and safety, to incorporate that actually in the application. So maybe the answer to yes is, as far as can it be considered within our Federal Register notice, it says yes, we will be considering that as part of the criteria.
That's a good bang for the buck, double. Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Basically, yes, that would be included. And the infra package came out on last June, $1.5 billion. It combines the large portion from 17 and the dollars for that particular program in 18. And again, there's 120 days for those applications to be submitted.
Is there anything the communities in the area could do to be helpful to underline or, give you more impetus in the process to, to show how strong of a need it is? Can the communities help underline that a little bit more?
I'm sure that as part of that, as far as, with the application, endorsements from the community and others, and leveraging with, with other stakeholders that are involved with that project and that have a stake in that project.
Yeah, well, there's a railroad interstate interface up in Shasta County they're quite concerned about too, so, but we'll speak on a different time on that. I have just a little time left. I'd hope to talk a little bit with Ms. Jefferson about the ELD situation, but the ELD mandate, do you believe that more time could be helpful for some of the smaller stakeholders, some of the smaller companies on that with implementation of ELDs? We're seeing a possible exemption for livestock haulers and others. Is this something that we could look at as the impending deadline comes on? You'll have to be really short on my time, I'm sorry.
We believe that there's sufficient time for equipage between now and the end of the year, but we would certainly welcome follow-up with you to have a discussion.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Mr. Danielson, your agency has enacted an impairment standard for alcohol use, which is 0.08 across the country. Has any similar standard been set for impairment for marijuana use while driving?
No, sir.
Do you know of any studies being conducted currently that would be geared towards setting a scientifically valid impairment level for drivers using marijuana?
We're actively engaged in research in this area. There's the impairment by drugs is not well understood, and of course there's no scientifically accepted standard for it, but we are actively engaged in research in this area and attempting, in addition to that, attempting to develop technological devices that law enforcement could use to test oral fluids to determine impairment.
Now, you're aware of the fact that recreational use of marijuana is legal in at least 6 states now, and medical use of marijuana or THC is also permissible in a number of other states. Do you believe that it is important for the federal government to come up with a standard for impairment because of the fact that marijuana or THC remains in the blood or remains detectable in a urine sample for 30 days, for blood, I think 7 days, saliva, I'm not sure. There might be some Fourth Amendment issues in terms of search and seizure with respect to that. But do you believe that it's important that the federal government come up with a impairment standard for marijuana?
Yes, sir. Since 2007, we've seen a 50% increase in marijuana usage. And so we think we know, what we do know about marijuana is that it impairs judgment, it impairs your driving ability, particularly with respect to reaction time. And so we think it is important to develop a scientifically based threshold for impairment so we can get unsafe drivers off the road.
Certainly, but for someone who used marijuana one time 28 days ago, and then they're subjected to a urine test, that doesn't show impairment at the time that the person was driving.
That's correct. So what we're looking for is specific to impairment, not just usage, but impairment at the time of driving.
All right, thank you. Ms. Denzar, more than 15 years ago, NTSB recommended that all new commercial vehicles be manufactured with collision warning systems. More recently, the board has recommended that all new commercial vehicles be equipped with automatic emergency braking. Last Congress, I introduced the Safe Roads Act, which would require that all new commercial vehicles are equipped with both of these important safety technologies. Can you discuss the importance of collision warning systems and automatic emergency braking, especially on heavy vehicles that can weigh 80,000 pounds or more? And Mr. Danielson, if you could give me your opinion on that as well.
Thank you, Congressman. I greatly appreciate that question. The NTSB, as you mentioned, has been advocating and has been recommending these type of safety tools be in vehicles, especially heavy vehicles, for many years. And that's because of the crash investigations that we've conducted. When a heavy vehicle is in a crash, and sometimes it's a multi-vehicle crash, the results are catastrophic. And we know that these collision avoidance technologies and these automatic emergency braking can and will reduce the number of these fatal crashes. So we support more movement in this area, and we also, that's in combination with our other commercial vehicle safety recommendations involving fatigue management and speeding. So it's all part of a group of safety efforts. But those technologies are something we've long advocated and we will continue to advocate for.
Thank you. Briefly, Mr. Danielson.
We agree. Crash avoidance technologies have tremendous potential to save lives, particularly in heavy vehicles, and that's why we've created the standard for electronic stability control. You might have heard that we convened a group of automakers last year to get their agreement to make automatic emergency braking standard in all light vehicles by model year 2022, which is several years before we would have been possible using just a notice and comment rulemaking approach. And we anticipate that this technology will expand beyond the light vehicle fleet eventually.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Schmucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I think I'd like to thank the chairman for scheduling this hearing. Obviously important. We still have far too many fatalities on our highways, so I applaud the effort of the coalition to reduce that to zero. It's a laudable goal, one that I think can be achieved. I did just a point of clarification, Mr. Danielson, in response to another question. We've seen those deaths rise slightly, I think about 9% in 2015, and then first 6 months of 2016 might have an uptick as well. You mentioned vehicle miles traveled is up as well. So are you saying if you compared the two, are we still declining as a rate per vehicle miles traveled?
The fatality rate outpaced the rate increase with vehicle miles traveled. There's a well-known correlation between fatalities and vehicle miles traveled. And when you take a look past the last major 4 recessions, you can actually see the dip in both the VMT and the fatality rate. However, it doesn't answer the whole question. What we do know is that as the economy recovers and price of gas or something, that part of the population that is most sensitive to the price of gas and tends to travel more when the economy starts to recover and the gas prices go along, also tends to be that part of the population that is overrepresented in crash populations because they tend to be inexperienced drivers, either very young drivers or very, very old. So there seems to be a kind of a multiplying effect.
Yeah. Of all of the initiatives, I guess, or things on the horizon in regards to improving or decreasing the fatalities, I think autonomous vehicles obviously has a lot of promise, and I know technology already is being used, but I think it's important as that develops over the next number of years and decades that I think we're going to need a federal standard, and we're seeing activities from states to develop standards as well. So the federal standard, I believe, your agency will be responsible for the standard. Am I right on that?
Yes, sir.
And can you describe what steps NHTSA is taking internally to prepare to serve as that federal entity to regulate autonomous vehicles?
Yes, sir. First of all, I'd like to point out that we've taken nothing off the table with regards to a future governance structure. But what we do believe is as this technology develops, we want to use the right tool for the right time. And we believe that the Federal Automated Vehicles Policy that we released last year was the right tool. In that it provided the world's first national framework for the safe testing and deployment of automated vehicles, which was designed to discourage a patchwork of state laws with respect to vehicle performance and safety, but at the same time was adaptive enough to leave room for market innovation. And as we go forward, we're going to collect more information that will be necessary for future actions relative to a future governance structure.
I believe there was a period to take public comments as a part of that. What's the next step in addressing those comments?
Last month, the secretary in Detroit announced that the NHTSA and the department would be releasing an updated version of the Federal Automated Vehicles policy within the next few months, and she's directed NHTSA to begin to prepare that update, and we're doing that right now.
So next, when can we expect that?
The time frame was the next few months. She announced that last month.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much. I guess I'd like to ask a question to two of the members, at the witnesses at the table. Being from Texas, of course, we have lots and lots of trucks, and safety is a major issue. And I noticed that Ms. Dinazar, that you have determined that speed is a major issue, as well as some of the underride guards. Have you attempted to make recommendations along these lines, and what kind of results have you had? And I guess Mr. Danielson, I would like you to respond as well.
Thank you, Congresswoman Johnson. And I'm also from Texas, so I certainly recognize the importance of trucking to our nation's health and welfare. And yes, we have made recommendations regarding speed limiters, as well as front, rear, and side underride guards. We conducted a study, in fact, in 2013 on underride and on safety of underride. And we've made recommendations regarding the setting performance standards regarding those underrides.
Congresswoman, both of those areas are areas of active consideration and activity for the agency. On speed limiters, we released in concert with FMCSA last year an NPRM that we received public comments on, and we're reviewing those. With respect to rear underride guards, we released an NPRM in 2015 and received comments, and we're reviewing those as well. We're also doing active research in this area to develop test procedures for overlap crashes in a rear crash scenario with a rear guard.
You know, some of the studies have indicated that 73% reduction in accidents could happen. Are you having any conversation with truck users or the companies? What kind of feedback are you getting there?
Yes, we received a lot of public comments on that rule, and we're reviewing that now. The goal of the NPRM, what the NPRM was looking at was harmonizing our standard with a standard that is already present in Canada, which I believe is a 35-mile-an-hour crash test threshold for rear guards.
But are you optimistic that we can achieve these goals of some speed reduction and some improvement in the trucks?
Because this is a regulatory proposal that is active on the agenda, I'm somewhat constrained in forecasting the content and timing of our regulatory agenda, but I can tell you that this is an area of active consideration in the agency.
Have you received some positive acceptance from some of the truckers?
I'd have to go back and review those comments and get back to you, Congresswoman.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's all, Ms.
Mr. Perry.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the panel for your attendance. I think my questions will be directed to Ms. Jefferson. First, regarding the FAST Act and the fact that it created a military pilot program for individuals, select personnel between the ages of 18 and 21 years of age, as well as a process to ease the integration of veterans in getting their CDLs and performing in that industry. We also know that the trucking industry has like many other industries, is struggling to find labor and help to do the driving. So I'm just wondering if you have any metrics to describe how those two programs are going.
Thank you, Congressman Perry, for that question. We are in the process of rulemaking to move forward with the military driver converting from military service to civilian and reducing barriers to getting a commercial driver's license, as well as moving forward with plans for the under 21 drivers who have previous military experience. So those are moving forward.
So you're in the rulemaking process. At what point? Do you have an expected date to put them out for public comment, or do you have a timeline at all that you can describe?
We issued a notice of proposed rulemaking in June, and we will continue to work through that process of getting public comment. In addition to that, there are other areas where we're working with our state partners as well as the motor vehicle administrators to make sure that we do everything we can to support our men and women who are coming out of military service into civilian life.
All right, thank you. As you may know, in April, I introduced a bill regarding comprehensive regulatory reform in the passenger carrier industry called Bus Regs 21. And I drafted the legislation because I kept hearing from constituents and owner-operators in the district and literally from across the country about a culture of overzealous enforcement from the agency. And I saw it myself when I first came to Congress, when I talked to previous director. You know, the school bus and motor coaches are the two safest modes of surface transportation that we have, yet the regulations just keep coming and coming for these folks, and they're struggling to maintain their businesses. And if you're trying to get into the business, you can just about forget it. So my bill attempts a direct regulatory reset. Now, on a positive note, I want to report that the agency has already rescinded 2 regulations that my bill proposed to rescind: the carrier fitness determination and the minimum insurance limits, and is proposing a revision to a 3rd, the lease interchange rule, which is also exceptionally problematic. One of the other things that is in the bill is an amendment to the mission statement, Ms. Jefferson. I just want to get your thoughts on it. Obviously, we want your mission statement to be about safety, right? But we also want to include the industry in itself, because a robust industry that is profitable and that is safe is good for not only the employees and the owners, but for the public that wants to travel and use them. And school buses are, I don't know where any of us would be without the school bus industry and ability to get our kids safely to school. So with that, we also want to add not only the priority on safety, but fostering an environment for a thriving passenger carrier industry. And this would be consistent with the FAA's mission statement and other agencies. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, if you find that objectionable, or if that's something we can work on together, or if that's something totally out of the realm of possibilities from your standpoint.
Well, I think, as you said, safety is our top priority, but we believe a healthy, robust commercial motor vehicle industry, both trucks and buses, is good for safety. I think companies across the industry, whether it be passenger carriers or property carriers, the vast majority realize that safety is a part of their business model, and it's good for business. And so from the standpoint of FMCSA, we would be happy to work with you, because we believe that a healthy industry is a safe industry. And the more money and profitability, hopefully those profits will also be used for safety.
I'm sure you can imagine, I'll close with this, I'm sure as the owner of one of the companies, whether it's a school bus company or motor coach company, the absolute last thing you want to hear or see in the news is there's been an accident where somebody was hurt, and it behooves all of them to do things as safely as they can for the viability of their business, if not their own conscience. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. I want to thank you, the chairman, and the ranking member who's not here, Mr. DeFazio, for taking into consideration a request that I, along with Representative Cummings and Duncan, penned to hold a hearing that could touch on school bus safety in light of the accidents that have been discussed here at Maryland and in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and others. In November 2016, these accidents occurred, 6 dead in Baltimore and 6 dead in Chattanooga. 31 passengers injured, 6 school-age children were taken. Too early is not the right term. They were taken, and that was wrong. No more precious cargo is there for any commercial carrier than children, school-age children, entrusted by their parents to go and get educated to have a better life. The NTSB has had ongoing investigations of these accidents and cannot answer questions directly related to each case. I understand that. But in both cases, it seems there were a number of safety precautions and oversight issues that could have prevented or mitigated the risk of injuries and fatalities suffered from the unfortunate events. Having said that, I want to ask a few questions of Ms. Denbar. In 5 reports since 2010, including accident investigations involving school bus crashes in Anaheim, Chesterfield, New Jersey, Knoxville, Houston, Texas, and Gray Summit, Missouri, the NTSB made several observations in which it concluded that compartmentalization was not enough to prevent all injuries, particularly in accidents involving side impact or high-speed rollover. Yet on your website, the NTSB states that it believes and recommends that new school buses should provide children with 3-point seat belts. A, does this recommendation still stand? Can you elaborate how the NTSB came to the conclusion that compartmentalization was an insufficient safety mechanism? And when can we expect the investigations in Chattanooga and Baltimore crashes to be released? And those are my questions for you.
Thank you, Congressman.
You're welcome.
Cohen. I appreciate your asking those questions because school bus crashes are always some of the hardest for us to investigate, but obviously very important to make sure that our children get to school safely. Some of the issues you mentioned that we can't speak specifically about the investigation, but that we are looking into is medical fitness as well as screening of drivers in school buses. You mentioned the 3-point seatbelt, lap shoulder harness seatbelt recommendation. That still does stand. We are recommending that states and school boards, as they buy new school buses, buy buses that have this type of better restraint system. And the reason is, in our crash reconstruction and our investigations, we found that there are certain types of crashes, such as a rollover crash or a side impact crash, where having a 3-point seatbelt is very important. I should say that school buses are very safe vehicles. It's much safer for a child to go to school in a school bus than almost any other vehicle. But the compartmentalization, while it is an important tool for safety in the school bus, it primarily helps with forward-type collisions. So that's why that 3-point seatbelt still stands.
Your statement, you said that you would, states should consider when purchasing new buses. Have you thought of anything stronger than consider in mandating, since it is such an important safety element that you have endorsed and found studies? And I've got 5 reports on school bus investigations that I want to enter into the record where they all say that school seatbelts would have saved children's lives.
We certainly will consider it, and as these, as the investigation for these 2 November school bus crashes occur, we'll again consider how the wording goes. In the past, we have always attempted to balance being very prescriptive with the feasibility of some of our recommendations, but we'll certainly take your comments under consideration.
I hope so. I've been working on this since the 90s, and I've always had school boards against it. They don't want to spend the money, and the money should come secondary to the safety. I would like to introduce for the record without objection these 5 reports that all indicate that school seatbelts on school buses would save lives. Dollars shouldn't be the issue with our precious cargo. There's some other issues I've dealt with, and I only have a few seconds left, but I want to ask this. Are there any recommendations any of y'all have on graduated driver's licenses, how we should try to improve those? those laws in the states and/or ignition interlock laws for multiple DUI offenders?
Sir, for all of our national priority programs that are kind of on the newer side, there is a period of time that it takes for states to comply, and graduated driver's license is the biggest example of this. We have 0 states who are eligible for these programs. NHTSA is going to work with these states to try and get them eligible. Congress sort of relaxed some of the standards that states still aren't there, but we've seen over time, particularly with our more mature priority programs, that states do come along and they do work. The strong laws that Congress requires under the FAST Act do work over time in terms of saving lives, and we've seen it with occupant protection. In 2016, for the first time, our seatbelt usage nationwide went over 90%. And that's largely because of the strong laws required under the authorizations at Congress. So we don't want to discourage lowering the standards too much. We take it on ourselves to try and work with the states to provide technical assistance to get them to where they need to be in order to have strong laws on the books.
Before I yield back the time that I don't have, I just want to thank you for what you've done. I passed a seatbelt law in Tennessee 15 years ago, and Jim Hall worked with us closely on that. I appreciated his support and hope you all will keep up the standards, because it was difficult to get the standards in there to say kids couldn't use cell phones or kids had to put on their seatbelts or the number of passengers and all that. And ignition interlock is something else we worked on back then. And for multiple DUI offenders, they ought to be able to do the Constitution backwards. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Barletta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I came to Congress, I owned a road construction business, so I know firsthand how dangerous it can be working in construction zones. We actually put the lines on the road that saved lives. You know, I always used to say, you never read in the paper the names of the people whose lives you've saved. There's only so much signage and protection that you can offer your employees to protect them from the constant threat of distracted drivers and speeding trucks and vehicles. The data speaks for itself. According to FHWA in 2014, 119 roadway construction workers lost their lives in work zone crashes. In 2015, 700 people were killed in work zones as a result of motor vehicle crashes. Just last month, I was personally touched by such an incident. Michael J. Friendy, who I had hired when I had my business, he was a 41-year-old from my hometown in Hazleton. He was setting up a construction zone on Interstate 81 when he was struck by a car and killed instantly. I knew Mike for over 20 years and was incredibly saddened by his death. My thoughts and prayers continue to be with his friends and his family and his co-workers as they grieve this incredible loss. Acting Deputy Administrator Weidlich, in your opinion, what steps can this committee take to combat work zone crashes and improve the safety of roadway construction workers and contractors so that we don't lose more talented and hardworking and good people like Michael Friendy?
Congressman, you're correct with stating that the dangers of work zones today, especially with the increases in volumes of traffic, night work that's going on, and the more work that's going on out on our roadways because we're trying to rehabilitate and reconstruct our infrastructure. Federal Highway Administration works in many different ways to improve work zones and to work with our stakeholders, whether it be states and locals or others. First, we have the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which includes minimum standards for work zone safety, signing, and buffer zones, and those types of elements within a particular work zone. We work on deployment of technologies, for example, intrusion alarms that would alarm workers when the work zone is actually intruded by a particular vehicle. A big part also is awareness and public education. Work Zone Awareness Week, we work with AASHTO and ATSA and get the word out because work zones are not only dangerous for workers, they're also dangerous for those vehicles that are going through it. As you stated, it was over 500 motor vehicle fatalities that occurred in work zones also on an annual basis. In working with this committee, I would hope that availability of those funds for deployment of those types of innovations and for education and awareness about work zones would continue.
Yeah. We're going to do a lot more work, because the only thing that was separating them from live traffic were rubber cones. Back in 2015, when this committee was working on a highway bill, I pushed for language to be included that would reform motor carrier safety scores to make sure that they were more reflective of a company's safety record. Just last month, the National Academies of Science published a report as required by the FAST Act, detailing their findings on the Compliance Safety Accountability Program, more commonly known as CSA. Deputy Administrator Jefferson, does FMCSA believe that the findings of this report require the safety measurement system to be replaced with a more defensible statistical model? And if so, what are the agency's specific plans and timetable for implementing such a corrective action plan?
Congressman Barletta, FMCSA supports the findings of the National Academies of Science, and we're grateful to the volunteers who worked on that study. It's our intent to provide a corrective action plan to Congress within 120 days of submitting that report. We are also working with the National Academies to identify strategies for implementing those recommendations. They've given us a roadmap, if you will, of ways to improve SMS, and it's our intent to follow through on that. And so as we go through the process of developing an implementation strategy that will get us to a better result. And so we appreciate the work that they've done, and also our intent to include industry and other stakeholders in the process as we go along as well. And of course, keeping Congress aware of our actions as we proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Tides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to address my question to Ms. Denzar. You've had the experience both inside the regulatory world and outside as an advocate, so I think you bring a special perspective to how to make regulation, what it takes to get it done, and why you need it, what goes on behind the scenes to protect our safety. I've raised concerns in this committee a number of times about what I think is the president's kind of misguided executive order, where he says for every regulation you put in place, you have to eliminate two, this arbitrary rule. As you've heard from some of my colleagues, regulation has become kind of a punching bag or a dirty word, where regulation is bad. We need to get rid of regulation. They tend to forget that regulation is put in place for the safety of people who are driving or who are riding on our highways and buses and cars, and going to school, our children. Also, they tend to forget that the regulations that y'all put in place are the result of legislation that we pass. I've got a list of the regulations that were required by the FAST Act, just the FAST Act, and I would remind this committee that some of the people who are criticizing regulations voted for that FAST Act that required y'all to put in place these regulations. So I would just ask you kind of what your perspective is on making regulations in this new environment, where you have to strike two that you thought were good for safety now in order to do something else as technology changes, communication changes, the world changes. Would you address that for us?
Thank you, Congresswoman Titus, for that very complex question. Clearly, we are not a regulatory agency, so we're a little bit different from my colleagues here on the panel. But the recommendations we make do affect regulation. And we are very careful about that. We are not for regulation that is unneeded. Any recommendations we make that affect regulations are based on an investigation of a terrible tragedy and ways that we can prevent it from happening again. That said, we also give recommendations that allow other options other than regulations. So many of our recommendations regarding impaired driving, distracted driving, are targeted more towards states, for example. Sometimes it's targeted towards companies. Sometimes it's targeted towards associations. So I think it's a balance between ensuring that those regulations that are that are most safety critical do go forward, and at the same time are not, any of those things are not delayed. For example, I'll give you an example, the safety fitness determination. We are very concerned that that delay will affect safety because that rulemaking was withdrawn. So that said, I think that I hope that all of us, no matter where we come from, are prioritizing safety in our decision-making regarding regulations as well as other forms of advancing safety.
Thank you. Other members of the panel will address this from the standpoint of your agencies of striking two to do one new one.
I think maybe I can just affirm from the Federal Highway Administration, I agree that safety is the #1 priority of the department, and that does take a priority in this 1-for-2 rule.
We at the FMCSA are reviewing all of our regulations, but as we continue to focus on safety, we take that into consideration. And so we want to make sure that the rules that are in place are remain current and relevant, but continue to focus our attention on safety.
I would just echo the comments of my colleagues.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Graves from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weidlich, in August of last year, South Louisiana, we experienced one of the greatest floods in U.S. history. It was about the 4th most expensive flood disaster, according to FEMA data. It was, by some measures, estimated to be a 1,000-year flood, if you can throw pictures up. I want to show you one component. So that's obviously an off-ramp. There's the freeway running from the bottom right toward the top left, the black strip there. And obviously, that's all water. All that brown is water up there. If you can go to the next one. That is the interstate right there. So the right side is the north side of the interstate. The left side is the south side. So that's, I guess, the north side's the westbound lane, and the left side is the eastbound lane. You may think that that's a levee in between. That's actually a safety wall. You can imagine if that's actually a shopping center in the back right of that. If you can go to the next one, I think I have a better picture. Maybe next one. All right, maybe not. Can you go back twice? So that's actually a shopping center back there, just to give you an idea of how that wall forced the pooling of water and exacerbated the flooding in this situation. And also, all up and down the highway here, we had several pockets where the interstate was flooded that I don't remember the number right off. I think there were estimated 1,500 cars that were just stuck on the interstate. They couldn't get anywhere because there was flooding on either side of them. Could you perhaps comment on that safety feature? As you see, there are no drainage outlets in that. That barrier goes on for miles, which also is an impediment to law enforcement and emergency vehicles trying to cross over. Does that look normal?
I'd hate to say whether it looks normal, not knowing specifically what's down there, but when we have these...
Well, I hope it doesn't look normal with 6 or 8 feet of water up against it.
When we have these types of events, it allows us to assess those situations as far as, with the emergency relief dollars, and to determine how do we move forward with this into the future. Matter of fact, in the FAST Act, it asked us to look at these types of situations where you have repetitive type of natural disasters that cause these types of events on our roadways, and to kind of make those determinations as far as to what to do in the future with these, potentially upgrading the facilities and changing the facilities so it doesn't happen again. With that said, we've been having a lot of you might want to say intense weather events over the last several years around the country. And as we also move forward with the FAST Act implementations of asset management, risk-based asset management, my hope is that, as we move to the future and correct these particular roadways, that we take that into consideration in these areas where you may have evacuation routes and things like that.
This can't be the first time you've ever seen something like this.
No, it is not.
Most of the walls that I've seen, well, look, I certainly understand the safety aspects. It blocks rubbernecking, it prevents head-on collisions, and certainly there's value there. But why there are not drain outlets in that wall and why federal standards would not call for certain increment of drainage flow or offsetting walls or something in some areas, I simply don't understand. I mean, we beg for levees like this all over South Louisiana, and to have one on the interstate is crazy. It just doesn't make sense to me at all. And you have many towns in Livingston, Walker, Denham Springs, and even in Baton Rouge that the flooding was significantly exacerbated on the north side of the interstate as a result of this safety feature. And so I want to ask if you could please go back to Federal Highways and advise us on the status of updating standards from lessons learned like this, the timeline of that, if you could advise us on how long it's going to take to get new standards in place to where we don't have situations like this again. And here we are approaching a year after the flood, no one's touched the wall. Still there, no drainage outlets, no nothing. And God forbid we have another big flood, but we are down at the bottom of one of the largest watersheds in the world, and that certainly is possible. Could you do that?
I will. I'll take that back and get back with you.
Great. Thank you very much. I have one other question. I'm looking at time. I'm going to go ahead and submit that for the record related to timing of finalizing regulations in the FAST Act. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair would like to recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes. Mr.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman. It's such a pleasure to be here serving under your chairmanship. I want to make sure that my comments aren't taken in a way that detracts from the historical confidence and professionalism of all your agencies, but I'm concerned, obviously, about the numbers we have in our staff report that the increase in fatalities and traffic accidents in the United States from NHTSA, Mr. Danielson, increased so dramatically from 2014 to 2015. Over 35,000 Americans lost their lives, one every 15 minutes. This was the largest increase over a one-year period in 50 years of record keeping. And then the Center for Disease Control, their research showing that we are an outlier in that regard when we look at other countries. So my question is in context of that historically you've all done a good job, but the urgency of a world that's changing so rapidly and your ability to adapt to that. So I'm going to bring three incidents areas just as an illustration and want you to respond to it. First, in procurement, I had a constituent die on Highway 101 in Marin County in Northern California some years ago, and he fell asleep and ran into a guardrail that had been approved by NHTSA, built by Trinity Industries. There's subsequently a New York Times story about a year ago about over $100 million judgment against Trinity. The ABC affiliate in San Francisco found out that Caltrans had literally thousands of these modified guardrails that were dangerous to the public and turned out to be involved in fatalities around the country, litigation against the Department of Transportation, Texas, Virginia. And my response when I was looking at this in the legislature was from the Secretary of Transportation, a great professional in the Brown administration, the director of Caltrans, was they relied on NHTSA and you had approved this and you hadn't responded to it. So I bring that in the context of the urgency for you to respond to situations like this and the confidence that is important for the public and states to have in you because they do. And then, so it's more illustrative of the story of your ability to adapt. And the other two areas, one of which has been brought up here extensively about marijuana and the increased use. CRS, I have a constituent, Philip Drum, who, because his sister died in an accident that was attributed to someone who was abusing marijuana, and the other vehicles made it his cause to come here and around the country. But in research we've gotten from CRS because of his questions is that several studies have shown that THS in people's blood was roughly twice as likely to be responsible for deadly crashes than drugs or alcohol, other drugs or alcohol. So the ability for you to respond to that in a world where states are approving, Colorado, now California, the legalization of marijuana, I think is particularly important, and the perception that people rely on NHTSA to be responsive. So how you can do that and Congress can. And lastly, in the area of technology, having dealt with Apple and other providers, it's my belief that technology exists right now, and there's been a story, at least in Money Magazine, that Apple believes in their next platform they'll have technology so that you can shut down phones when there's movement in a car so that they can't receive. And so the issue of distraction could be inhibited quite a bit. There's currently technology, but it requires a Federal Communication Commission waiver that for less than $30 you can put a device in the car so a parent could, and it could intercept any kind of transmissions either coming in or out of the car. So those three instances are just illustrative to me of the urgency and the confidence that the public and states need, and the private sector, that you have the ability to respond quickly. And the urgency is particularly acute because if we're an outlier, there are lives at risk, not to indulge in hyperbole. So what is it that you think you need from us to be able to be more responsive or to communicate more clearly to states that there's a danger involved, a prospective danger while you do your due diligence to legalizing marijuana? There's a danger involved if we don't get on top of distracted driving, and there may be technology, so how can we prod Apple and Samsung to get us that technology sooner rather than later?
Sir, you raise a lot of really important points, particularly about behavioral safety. The one thing, your point on 2015 and the largest rate increase in 50 years is right on, and that's a source of major concern. Historically, I'd just like to, broaden our aperture just a little bit. If you go back those 50 years and look at our fatality rate at that time, today we're 1/5 where we were 50 years ago. So vehicles are safer, roadways are safer, and the work of—
Mr. Danielson, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the first comments I made were meant to address that. So we've done really good work, but we've got this anomaly right now that I think we have to have a sense of urgency about correcting.
I'd like—
So I acknowledge what we've done.
Okay. I'd like to defer to my colleague at Federal Highway on the first issue of the guardrails, and then I can address your second and third issue.
Let me see if I can address guardrails very quickly. Roadside hardware, there are standards for roadside hardware, and they have improved over the years. Our current standard is MASH, Manual and Assessing Safety Hardware. It's an AASHTO standard. It was just recently adopted. The previous one was NCHRP 350. Roadside hardware is tested to those standards. That's like the laboratory test. I hate to say it and call it that way, but it's a controlled test. When that test is passed, and we at Federal Highway review those test results to ensure that it passes that, states will use that roadside hardware out if they choose. You also have to assess in-service performance, maintenance, and construction practices that go along with this, which may vary from state to state. We do, when it comes to guardrail end terminals, which is the one you have brought up, we do have an in-service pilot on that, with 5 states currently involved with that. And what we have found from reviewing those end terminals, that there's really none of those end terminals are better or worse than the others. So our program is fact-based and data-driven and performance-based, and without that data showing us that these truly are dangerous or more dangerous than what else is out there, we would not pull those particular devices.
So, Mr. Danielson, the chair is indulging me. I appreciate those comments, although we can engage in further conversation outside of my limited time.
Okay, on marijuana, as you mentioned, you have a number of states that are legalizing marijuana. From 2007 to 2014, we saw a 50% increase in usage. And we know that marijuana impairs judgment and impairs driving ability, particularly with reaction time. And so our research is geared to try and establish a baseline threshold where we can establish impairment. Because right now we don't have a scientifically acceptable threshold for impairment of marijuana. And the other technological challenge associated with that is the detection of impairment. Even once we have that, do we have the technology to test either, oral fluids or other biometric features to establish impairment by law enforcement officials? Right now, NHTSA uses the Drug Recognition Expert Program, where we train about 8,000 law enforcement officials on a battery of tests to basically, because different drugs have different effects, to basically establish impairment by various drugs. These are court-accepted procedures, but it's very complicated. It takes a lot of time to train law enforcement. They're very important, but having a device would be very important. On distraction, as you mentioned, just recently there was several press reports about.
We'll have to ask that we, but we can have a second round of question if you care to stay for that. So just got to be fair. Okay, thank you for. I'll recognize now Mr. Faso for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wadlick, are you familiar with the issue between your agency and New York State relating to certain signage that New York State has erected over the last 2 years relating to tourism and other travel promotion and other New York State promotional signage along state highways? And your agency has declared that these signs are not in compliance with regulation and is seeking to have New York State remove the signs. Can you update, number one, are you familiar with this issue? And can you update me on your agency's position on this matter?
I am familiar with the issue on signs in New York. And we have issues in other states. And we, as an agency, work with those states to bring the states back into compliance. Currently, we're actually working with New York to see if there's a way we can develop a pilot with those particular signs. But yes, we're working with the state of New York and the DOT to do that.
And what is the consequence if New York doesn't comply with the regulations?
Again, we like to work with the state to bring them in compliance, but we do have the ability to withhold federal funds if it comes down to that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to include for the record a letter from Peter Osborne to the Commissioner of New York State Department of Transportation dated May 8th, 2017, in which it says that they have not received any response from the state on this exact issue of the pilot. So I'd like to follow up with
without objection
the acting administrator on this topic going forward. And Ms. Dinzar, I apologize for not being here earlier. I was in an Agriculture Committee meeting, but I was intrigued by your response on the three-point safety belt. At what point did the three-point safety belts become required by manufacturers in rear seats of vehicles?
In passenger vehicles rather than school
vehicles,
buses.
Yes.
I believe, I should get back to you with the exact dates, but it's.
My understanding
I believe in
it was 2008 or 2007 that this became required for the rear seats.
For a requirement, yes. I suppose NHTSA could answer that better. I know a lot of vehicles had them long before that. They were voluntarily installed.
Because I've had some incidents in my district where people have, regrettably have suffered serious injury or even fatalities only wearing a lap harness, a lap seat belt in vehicles that were manufactured pre the required deadline. I think it was 2008 again. Has there been any effort by the agency to try to encourage vehicle manufacturers to alert auto consumers of the dangers and advise them as to how one might add a rather inexpensive safety enhancement to those seat belts?
The NTSB has not done that. What we did do is look at rear occupant protection, and we looked at other ways to protect occupants of the vehicle, since now that is a mandate. But it does take 20 or more years before the fleet overturns, and there are plenty of cars that are before that requirement. But we did look at, in our rear occupant protection workshop, more about the crash worthiness of the rear occupant area.
Okay. And Mr. Danielson, again, I hadn't intended to raise this question, but the question on marijuana use and what is the definition or the lack of definition of incapacity based upon consuming marijuana substances. Is there a standard that we should be looking at, asking your agency or others to develop as to what might be the appropriate level for which we know what the blood alcohol count is for alcohol, for instance? What should be the standard for marijuana?
The goal would be to develop a standard, but that needs to be developed scientifically so that the data and technology isn't quite there, and the research isn't quite there, but we're working towards that actively, particularly given this data. We try and have our programs be data-driven, and so we see these increases, and we want to get on top of this. So our research is focused in this area to try and establish a threshold.
Could you advise us for the record as to the timing on that and whether we should anticipate or whether it's appropriate to contemplate legislation in this area? I would appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
All right, gentleman yields back. We have an opportunity for an additional round of questioning for those that are still here. Did you have any more, Mr. Faso, or would? Okay, I'll turn to my ranking member here, Mr. Holmes Norton. Would you have an additional question in this round?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Well, I do. Otherwise, we'll be soon finished after that. So I want to come back with Ms. Jefferson, our Deputy Administrator there, on following up on the ELDs. I ran out of time earlier. We know with this mandate coming down the pike here for the electronic logging devices that projected to cost around $2 billion to implement as imposed under the previous administration, that again, in my neighborhood, we have very many small independent carriers in ag industry and the related services they provide between a mill, livestock, whatever. And so they're seeing this as a heavy burden. It's a little different deal for the large carriers, that many of them already use these technologies, as we know, and they're good. It's good technology. But again, the small carriers really have a harder time bearing these new costs with a mandate such as this. And so, and they don't really see an opportunity for compensation. But just last night, my understanding is that in the THUD, that the legislation provided in full committee a 1-year delay of the mandate for livestock haulers, and I think insect haulers here, which sounds kind of funny, but that means beekeepers, I think, primarily. So that likely gets through here. So is FMCSA ready to know the difference between on implementing that for livestock haulers for the 150-mile, as the crow flies, exemption zone that is being sought and worked through? Will they be geared to be able to do that? Should we complete this legislation for that additional delay for those types of carriers?
Congressman, there are ag exemptions that exist to hours of service. Mm-hmm. And some of those, as you related to the 150 air miles for certain livestock and insects, I'm assuming bees as well. And those don't change under the ELD mandate. ELD is basically the methodology for tracking hours of service for those who currently are required to track their hours of service. And so exemptions that exist to hours of service currently will exist after December 18th. And so we will continue to work with agriculture and segments of that industry that have questions or concerns about the ELD implementation. We believe that ELDs will promote safety, making it easier to record hours of service for those who are required to maintain records of on-duty status.
Well, certainly no one's against safety, but it isn't always easier for everybody to come up with, meet a mandate. We had some pro-regulation arguments here. We have a lot of frustration with regulations that, well, a lot of people are looking for flexibility, and they have unique situations that they are, you know, where, in, let's say, livestock hauling, for example, that's a unique situation where the livestock might be at a particular time, and weather, what have you, and you can't just stop. And in other cases too, when there are other types of industry seeking some types of exemptions too, and you know, rentals and even government contracting and some of the large carriers that have unique delivery needs. So I just want to know that that FMCSA is looking at some of these. Do you see that any further exemption might be granted where these folks can prove that the regulation, though well-intended, really harms them?
We have a process for those who are seeking exemptions. As I said, there are currently exemptions to hours of service that exist for segments of agriculture. If the request is an exemption to the hours of service, they may already exist. When it comes to being able to meet the compliance date for electronic logging devices, our target is December 18th. We would be happy to follow up and talk about specific issues that you may have, or we also are providing information, questions and answers on our website. We continue to update those every day to make sure that folks understand the upcoming requirements for ELDs. We also have information on hours of service that's available as well. And
okay,
our staff...
I just want to, and I'm sorry on time here, but I just want the idea that those that are going to be in the enforcement capacity will be fully informed of whatever exemptions, whether it's the livestock and ag type one or others that may come down the pike, so that people aren't getting caught in the middle out there if enforcers haven't been properly trained on that. So you'll see that information is out there.
Absolutely. We work very closely with law enforcement to ensure they have up-to-date information.
Thank you. And briefly, I want to jump to Mr. Danielson. In your opening statement there, you had some interesting, very interesting information on marijuana and its effects. And we have several states now having legalized it, even still in defiance of federal law. And you were talking about impairment. Would you recap just for a few seconds, impairment and some of those other stats you gave in the beginning?
Yes, sir. The bottom line for impairment by drugs is that it's not well understood because there's not a scientifically...
But you're talking reaction time is down and total awareness.
So what we do know is that usage rate has gone up 50%. We also know from laboratory studies that marijuana impairs judgment and impairs driving ability, particularly reaction time, which makes it dangerous to use when driving.
Now, what is you have different potency, you have different types of ability to ingest marijuana or marijuana product. How many hours after it's been used? I mean, do you have these kinds of stats that you're working forward, you know, with potency? How many hours ago you've used it before you're driving, or you would resume driving? What do you have on that?
Well, that would be part of the research in order to establish a threshold.
How's your research coming? What do you need?
That's what I owe for the record. I was asked previously to provide some additional information for the record on that research.
Yeah, would you provide that to my office as well, please?
Yes,
sir. What do you need, though, additionally to have a handle on this in general, because we don't seem to have clear standards for what a DUI is, and you especially tie that to trucking, for example, you got a big problem. Go ahead.
It's because we understand alcohol impairment so well, and we have an easy test. Drugs are different because drugs just the body reacts to them differently depending on the drug. So we've had somewhat of a complex battery approach to this, where we train law enforcement officers to do roadside tests with people who are suspected of drug impairment. As we move forward with this research, our hope is that we would have something that would be perhaps a device, not unlike a breathalyzer, where we could test people for drug impairment.
Yeah, certainly it has a couple different things. THC, my understanding, goes away right away, but the other elements of it stay in the cells of the body much longer, and so it sounds like we need more information on how to quantify that. So, well, with that, I'll stop there, and so if there's not any further questions from any committee members, we will go ahead and thank each of you for your time, your parents, for your travel, for being here today. It's been very helpful and a good ongoing discussion. So I will ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may have been submitted to them in writing, and that unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. So without objection, so ordered. If no other members have anything to add, the subcommittee stands adjourned.